turnout. Obviously, there was a much larger crowd of trans allies outside. Right? 3. And Crispin Blunt wasn't one of them. I wonder why. Moving on. I am delighted to have 2 actual experts with me, so you don't have to listen to me very much. We didn't really properly introduce you, did we? So I thought I would. My phone is almost overwhelmed by the size of the bios, so I will have to curtail them. Yes, if you don't know Stephanie, she is the founder and director of Transgender Trend, established in 2015 to call for evidence-based healthcare. What a novel suggestion. For gender dysphoric children and young people and science-based teaching in schools. She's the author of a fabulous book called Communicating with Kids. She's got a background in teacher training and parent support. She was shortlisted for the John Maddox Prize in 2018. There's somebody else who's been shortlisted for that in the room. Hello, Helen. And in 2020, Stephanie was an intervener in the High Court in support of Kira Bell and Mrs. A. She was also awarded the British Empire Medal for services to children in the Queen's Jubilee Birthday Honours List. As trained in psychiatry, then forensic psychotherapy at the Portman Clinic. He then trained as a group analyst. For 12 years, he ran a national specialist psychotherapy service in the NHS for adults with gender dysphoria, from which his research and writing is informed. I hear you may have a new book.
You got one yet?
I haven't got it yet. I'm looking forward to reading it. I know. He now works exclusively in private practice based in Harley Street. He's an honorary clinical associate professor for UCL, etc., etc. It goes on and on and on. And it's...
And the patron of the LGBT.
Oh, yes, and you're a patron of an organisation called LGB Alliance, which is a very good one. The format today is that we're going to hear from each of our experts. We're not going to talk just about puberty blockers. We were originally going to talk about puberty blockers, and then our friend Annalise Dodds made a statement on something called conversion therapy that showed that she had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. And then the Conservative Party also made a statement suggesting that they too might compete with the foolishness of the Labour Party and also bring in a ban, so-called ban on conversion therapy. So we're going to talk about puberty blockers and conversion therapy, or its banning. We're going to hear from our experts. We're going to host questions from you, either on the Slido or with the roving mic. And we're going to show our little film that LGB Alliance made about puberty blockers. I suppose all I'm going to do is ask questions. I would just say that I think on the gender wars, if you like, gender v sex wars, it often feels, I think, a bit like aliens arriving on Earth and trying to make sense of these strange human beings. I often think we wander around, and I think conversion therapy is probably, this alien civilization that we live in is one in which, children are told that puberty will be too dangerous for them, and where Munchausen by proxy parents are applauded for mutilating their children. It's such a strange world we live in, and often we have to navigate this strangeness by trying to come up with convincing arguments that don't immediately offend people. And the conversion therapy ban is a perfect example of that, where it's actually very difficult to start the conversation because there are so many assumptions built in to that conversation. And really, in a sense, today is to help us all sort of try to find the best way to open the conversation with many members of the public who have no understanding of the real issues at the heart of it. And so to help us start that conversation, I would like to show the film. And if this works, then you're immediately going to see a film. I wanted to quote, after seeing that, I was looking for a quote, I'll bring it up. In 1998, at a conference held by Gendis, which was an early sort of pro-trans conference that was held every year, in 1998, mermaids hadn't yet become a charity, and they held a conference, and somebody came, Rebecca White, I think was her name, and she was a parent of a trans child, and she spoke to the conference and explained what mermaids was. She explained why mermaids were so fascinating to young people because they had no genitals, but she also made an extraordinary admission, which was that we all know, and remember this is 1998, before the huge social contagion happened that would draw in a lot of other gender non-conforming children. She said, we all know that at least 50% of the kids that we see, and this is in mermaids, will not continue to believe they are trans and will become happy homosexuals. And so I suppose the debate we're all having is, how are we able to prevent, what was 50%, and I suspect is a lot more now, how do we prevent that 50% of kids who even mermaids in the days when they were honest, acknowledged were not whatever they think is trans? And to help us sort of find ways to do that, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Davies-Arai and ask her to show us the way.
Hi, can we have the first slide? Oh, please, thank you. I was asked to bring this. This is a slide, a photograph of two 10-year-old girls. It was taken in, I think, 1969, 1970. That is me and my sister. I'm the one on the right. I'm the coolest. It's like, I think that's quite Peaky Blinders. I'm quite ahead of my time. So that's me on the right, my sister Helen on the left. But at that time, we were Mike and Bill. I was Mike, Helen was Bill. And we lived this life where we modelled ourselves on Just William. So those of a certain generation will remember the books by Richmal Crompton. So we used to go out, just the two of us. We'd explore all over the town where we lived. We'd find, we'd go and play on wastelands where there were old buses we'd go on and pretend to drive. We'd light fires and cook potatoes. And we ate them half raw. We made bottles of licorice water because that's what William did. We had no idea what licorice water was, so we put a stick of licorice and filled up the bottle with water. And then we grew older, more mature, and moved on to Jennings and Derbyshire. And this went on right through my childhood. And when I look back, at age 15, I just think of this, 15-year-old teenage girl, I had morphed into Flight Lieutenant Simon Carter of Colditz. My sister Helen was Colonel John Preston. So this went on, and it was a sort of imaginary world, but I was always inhabiting male characters, and male characters were the ones I related to. And at that age, we were fiercely boys. I didn't even like George from the Famous Five because she only thought she was a boy. I hear women say, Jo from Little Women was my, heroine when I was growing up. I would never have read Little Women. I still haven't. That title had no attraction to me at all. Sounds really boring. So we were really fiercely boys, and our parents would buy us clothes from the Littlewoods catalogue that would be delivered to your door, and so we were bought boys' clothes. Nothing was made of it. But then most kids in those days, most kids wore brown jumpers. There wasn't the split that there is now. But those. When I look back, I then went into adolescence and that was an incredibly difficult time. So I had all the eating disorders. I really struggled with becoming a woman. And I think probably it wasn't until I was 31 and had my first child that I really came to terms with being a woman and started to embrace it. And it wasn't really until my daughter was born, which was when I was 40, that I really thought, I'm going to really celebrate being a woman now because I don't want my daughter to grow up feeling ambivalent about that. So it was a long journey, and I think when I look back, it was a huge struggle, but the struggle was mine, the pain was mine, the struggle was mine to go through, and I came out the other side of it on my own path, on my own difficult and long journey. And I just look at myself then and think, what would happen today? And there is so much that's changed in the culture. The subject of today is conversion therapy. And I think Sex Matters have just put out a brilliant idea to put out their version of modern conversion therapy, which is converting boys into girls and girls into boys. And of course, by doing so, converting their sexual orientation automatically. And that is the real conversion therapy that we're all worried about today. when I was growing up, there was no such thing as trans. So nobody looked at my sister and I and said, are they trans? I can't even remember being called a tomboy, actually, and the adults really weren't bothered. Can we have the second slide? Good old parenting in the 50s. That's basically what it was like. My parents didn't, they let us get on with it. They didn't, they weren't really interested. They didn't have the time. They were busy. They were, you know, they didn't, you know, parenting has changed so much. Now we are encouraged to follow the child, to let the child lead us. There's a sort of idea that children are really wise. They teach us so much, don't they? Which is, you know, which is really nice, because it's true, they do. But we've really taken it to a real extreme where we think children know best, and the child-adult positions have become reversed. And you see this not just in parenting advice now, but you see it in the gender clinics, and you see it in schools. There's a film about the Tavistock, which they're very proud of. It's on their website. It was on ITV, I think, a few years ago, where Polly Carmichael is saying to a 7-year-old boy who's obviously going to grow up and be gay. I mean, although we shouldn't really presume children's sexuality at all, but he's this little boy, loves wearing nail polish, and she says, and do you think you'll always feel like a girl? And he said, yes. And she said, or do you think you'll ever change? No. The boy is 7. Of course he knows he'll never change. Just as 15-year-old me knew that I would never change. And here I am now. I'm now the mother of 4 children. I'm married with 4 children. When, as a child and as a teenager, I never wanted to get married. I never wanted to have children. So I'll leave this. I'm the token straight here on this panel. But I do think it's important to say that it is not all gay children. It is the change of sexual orientation. And one thing that's happened today, and I think it's a result of one big change in the culture, apart from the parenting culture, is the culture that I grew up in, which was very 70s, sexist. All women were sort of scantily clad bimbos, airheads. Now it's just abusive and degrading porn. So that landscape has really changed, I think, made things so much more difficult for girls growing up today. And one thing that, and I think porn has a great connection with this, with gender identity and certainly the teaching in schools. And one thing is that more and more heterosexual girls are identifying as gay men, which I think is really ironic because it's the gay boys who are bullied by being called girls in school. And that's how crazy this whole thing has become. Thank you.
Brilliant. I absolutely love that. You looked more butch than I did. Not anymore.
Only the good ones.
I wondered, I'll get Az to respond to you as well, but I wondered how, I think it's really important that in this debate we're careful not to make it that it's just lesbian, gay and bisexual teenagers that we're protecting, because obviously there's a huge constituency out there of parents who are concerned about their kids who are not going to be homosexual or bisexual. I wondered, both of you, how important you thought it was to involve gender non-conforming kids who will go on to be happy heterosexuals as well.
I think it's important. Somebody did a study and said from the kids who have gender dysphoria from an early age who desist, around 60% of the boys are gay. And with girls, it's 50-50, and I don't know how accurate that is. But it doesn't surprise me that more girls, I know from so many women that they had childhoods quite similar to mine in how they saw themselves, who they related to, and male characters in books and films, etc. So I think it is important, because I think to see it as a purely gay issue misses part of the story. And I'm very keen on not leaving anybody out of this story, whether it's gay kids, autistic kids, looked after kids, troubled teenage girls, whoever it is, they're all being affected by this.
Yes, do you agree?
I think in my cohort, people I see, and mine is a distorted cohort, it's not representative possibly, the males who would consider transsexuals, not the transvestites or the AGPs, but the transsexual ones, were overwhelmingly on the autistic spectrum, and a whole load of them were asexual, and they didn't have a sexuality, and a lot of them presumed that there was something wrong with them because of their gender, and the hope that was that when they changed and something different might happen, but they remained asexual. Whereas the females there was an overrepresentation of internalized lesbophobia or trauma, or both, whether or not they had autistic spectrum. But the males were overwhelmingly autistic.
Brilliant. Thanks. I mean, before I hand over to you, it's something that I've often said, and we've talked about in LGB Alliance, that in a way, we hope the emergence of LGB Alliance is a sort of sign of the maturing of the gay movement. I mean, I always think of the LGBTQ as themselves quite adolescent in their behaviour, and we like to think of ourselves as the senior citizens and the adults, partly because we're all about 92 years old. But I do think I think it's an accurate representation of how we feel towards the rest of the community, but I think it's not a bad place to be in for a gay organisation or an LGB organisation to be expressing concern about the rest of the community. That, we say we're not, obviously we care most, that's why we were set up to protect gay teenagers and gay youth and gay rights. But it doesn't play badly with the public to say we also are very concerned about our straight sisters and brothers, if you like, and about straight young people, autistic young people, etc. And on that brilliant thought, I'd like you to wow us with your story of a little bit of your biography and how when did you come to realize what your colleagues might have been thinking of conversion therapy was actually the opposite of the truth?
Well, the colleagues that I've worked with have always had me bleating on about it, so I didn't let them have any other misinformation. But outside of my small sphere of influence, I mean, the Royal College, I mean, how embarrassing. There's meant to be a Royal College psychiatrist, but there's no thinking, there's no critical thinking. They're just told what to think by Stonewall et al., and they come up with mission statements and college statements which most psychiatrists actually that I speak to feel are not very thoughtful. So those of us who have been offering therapy for people with gender dysphoria, it's not complicated, it's quite straightforward. It basically involves, oh really, why do you think that, how did you get there, and trying to show they're working through. And what I say to people is, if you've got a small child who suddenly thinks that they're the wrong sex, wouldn't you hope that someone, somewhere, clinically, would ask them why? And that... And it's hard for them to say no, because who wouldn't want their child to be asked why? But by bringing in the conversion therapy bill, you can't ask that question. Instead, you're saying, oh, yes, you are the wrong sex, your body's wrong, and all this sort of stuff. You know, I've got parents who come and see me whose daughters are being affirmed as a boy while there's a pterodactyl sitting next to the daughter, and there's a cat on the other side of the daughter in the classroom. The biology teacher is affirming the pterodactyl, who's an extinct animal that's suddenly alive in the classroom. And the teachers have gone mad. My first papers were about whether because the Portman Clinic, even though it's with the Tavistock, was polar opposites. The Portman Clinic believed, before I got there, that it was a psychosis. So my first papers, these are academic papers that no one reads apart from the person who writes them. So my first papers were questioning, is this a psychosis? And then by the time I finished writing these papers that no one reads, I answered my question by saying, well, yes, it is a madness, but the madness isn't located in the individual, it's located in society around the individual who has a mad response to them. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing societal, organisational, political madness around someone who has problems, and the problems they believe are with their sex and gender, which is a bit like me in my maths A-level, which I was terrible in maths A-level because I'd work out the answer over there rather than over there because something had gone wrong with my working. So with these people who are confused, you just try and work out how they got there. There's no dispute that they are very troubled, they're very disturbed, they're very unhappy. Their conclusion is it must be about their gender, but that's a false conclusion. There's nothing wrong with their body. I've always said nobody's wrong. But yes, they're distressed. Yes, they're unhappy. Try and work out what the unhappiness and disturbance is and treat that. And then you've got all these myths that are... I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to write this book was because the climate of doing the therapy is so difficult that I've stopped seeing gender patients. I do see their parents, I do see families, I do see organisations, but I won't see the patients now because... Like my PA said, why can't you just see all the patients that don't cause any problems? You know, so I thought, yeah, you're right, actually. So, yeah. So one of the reasons I wanted to write this book was because I wanted to put down everything that I'd worked out in the 23 years so that people who are brave enough to do it can do it. And there's a big chapter on the therapy stuff in there. But it's keeping it really basic, just asking basic questions. The gender clinics were criticised for not having therapy, so they came up with a non-therapy. So affirmation looks like therapy. You've got people sitting in chairs talking, but it's not therapy because there's no thinking. So therapy, one analyst said, therapy only involves, it's only therapy when you have two minds thinking about what's happening. Whereas affirmation, there's no thinking. There's this colluding with this false solution rather than trying to get to the root of what the problem is. The unfortunate thing, it's called affirmation therapy. Affirmation sounds good, it sounds positive, and therapy makes it sound like it's a useful talking exercise. Well, it's neither of those things. It's neither good and it's not therapeutic, so it's a misnomer. Whereas the actual therapy is just trying to work out with someone. And what I found is that when I saw people individually, I saw people in groups, I found the groups much better because the individual setting replicated the yes, no, right, wrong, male, female, dyadic split in the psychopathology, whereas in the groups you had everyone with a gender dysphoria, all different, whether they're actually transvestites or transsexuals or AGPs or somewhere in between, saying, well, you know, you sound just like me, but you sound mad. And that was far better coming from them than coming from me. And what their understanding of what it was to be male or female, which were completely autistic, very caricatured ideas, these rule frameworks, they were dismantled by the patients and challenged. And after a period of time, they were fine. I mean, less than 2% of the people going through my therapy service had any physical interventions. And those 2% said, we know it's mad, but we're just doing it because, you know, we've always wanted to do it. But 2%. And they all ended up being happy with their biological bodies and their sex. And what they got was a greater repertoire of what it was possible as being male or female, and me encouraging them that it's okay to subvert what they felt were their very prescriptive frameworks that actually nobody else had. They just had in their minds.
Really interesting. Really interesting. Yeah, I can't imagine we can get to a stage where it's good for a therapist to just say, you're mad. I mean,
years of training.
Well, I mean, now that we've, if you like, had the introductory stage, this is the difficult bit because now we have to solve the problem. We have to work out what is our manifesto, if you like, or our strategy, because Annalise, our friend Annalise Dodds, is likely, you know, let's assume, that the Labour Party looks like it'll become the government, and Annalise Dodds will be in an important position, and she wants to bring in a conversion therapy ban. So we have to work out what our stance is. And you mentioned, Stephanie, that Sex Matters has produced this brilliant paper. I mean, we as LGB Alliance, we haven't got a position yet. We, you know, like everybody in this room, we agree that I presume, we think that no person can change their sex. But the question is, how, you know, when we go to a committee and we're going to be navigating this subject with a committee that will probably be made up at least 50% of MPs or peers who think you can change sex, and it's a terrible thing. It's so traumatic to tell the truth to somebody that they can't change sex. We have to work out, do we just tell the truth, or should we do like the trans lobby did when they were trying to get the Gender Recognition Act in? They sort of sinuously and wriggly played with the truth. So the two things I think that the Sex Matters sort of guidelines suggest is that first let's deal with under 18s. It basically says that we should treat gender affirmation healthcare as we do FGM, and it basically no doctor should be able to interfere with a kid's puberty or to stop a kid going through normal puberty. Where do you stand on that? Is that something you would endorse?
So I think it's a brilliant proposition to put out, because it calls their bluff. It throws the ball into their court. It says, right, you want to fight on conversion therapy? Here's your fight. You know, this is what the real conversion therapy is today. It's sterilising and medicalising young gender non-conforming children. So I think it's a brilliant strategic move, and I hope that it will make some people think, oh shit, no, we don't want to fight this, you know, because the opposite side has been put. The proposal itself is not my position, although I'm not saying I'll never change on that. And that's really because I think the laws and the regulations are there already, and we need to be using them rather than bringing in new legislation which could be repealed at some time. There's a danger of, so the trans activists exceptionalize this condition, these children, this treatment, as not having to follow all the rules of medicine that we usually... Sorry, I'm not speaking. And there's a danger that we mirror that by exceptionalizing it back at them, by, you know, ban conversion therapy, ban puberty blockers. So I would rather... And the problem is much bigger than that. The problem is really the ideological capture of institutions throughout society. How did we let healthcare get captured? How did we let education get captured? So it's looking back at the regulations that we have in place and making sure that we're following them, holding people to account to make sure that the whole thing can't happen again, because it's a massive failure of safeguarding of children, and it's a massive medical scandal. So how has it been allowed to happen? So what I want to see is people being held to account, and measures put in place to make sure that the rules and the regulations, the regulatory bodies, for example, can do their jobs properly, and this doesn't happen again. I also think, sorry to go on, but I also think that it's really, really important to change people's hearts and minds. So the job that everybody is doing about talking about this and explaining to people what it means is really, really important. It's what the gay movement did and why the gay rights was successful, because, you know, bit by bit with careful work, they made sure that society, they brought society with them, whereas the trans activism has really come in behind the scenes and then, thrown this done deal at us and said, this is how it is, and you're bigots if you don't agree with us. But I think that actually for real change and for really lasting change, you do need to take society with you. You do need to change hearts and minds. So that's also part of the job.
Yep, absolutely. Where are you on sex matters and on the under-18s, on their sort of suggestion that basically it should be compared, it should really be seen in the same regulatory framework as FGM?
Well, I think a lot of my clinical colleagues would take a far more diplomatic, neutral stance. I'm not like them. I agree with it. I agree with what they're proposing. I think that no child has the mental capacity to consent to, being sterilised, having no orgasmic function, having relatively unusual brain development, poor bone density, on a whim that they have as a child, which, as you said, how do you know they're going to persist with it? And also, even with adults, 26% of my therapy patients were regretters, and they all said that they were missold something. It's a bit like, this is the new PPI, with a different sort of PP. This is, they all felt they were missold something, and so I actually think yes. I agree, Stephanie. If they're going to say that me asking someone, "Oh, really? Why do you think you're the wrong sex?" is illegal, then surely chopping bits off children should be illegal too.
That's, I suppose, what they call a leading question, isn't it? I just suddenly remembered, like a random thought. I think I see Bev in the audience, and she said, "You must remember to point out that things are moving internationally. In Holland, the first article, I think, is that right? Article has been.
This was a TV program.
First TV program.
Just yesterday or the day before, the first time that the mainstream media in the Netherlands has broadcast a good program highlighting the dangers of puberty blockers, and it's caused a huge rumpus, as you can imagine, in the country of the Dutch protocol.
Great, good. And our wonderful Icelandic friend may go up and talk to him. God, I can never pronounce your names. I'm not going to make an attempt at it and annoy you. But our wonderful and brave Icelandic friend, who's about 6'3", so you won't miss him, was pointing out that in Iceland the laws have changed in a way that will also make it much more difficult to do modern conversion. What do you think about the name modern conversion? Do you think it'll take off? I've spoken to Maya and I haven't told her, but I wonder whether or not it will take off. Will it really land saying, we have essentially for years have been saying transing away the gays is and for obvious reasons that's a little bit difficult to land with legislators, but is modern changing the terminology and calling it modern conversion therapy, and that's what we're trying to ban. Do you think that'll work?
I think it's a good, yeah. I think Maya said that it's like modern slavery. Why not look?
Yes.
Why look at slavery in the past when we've got it now, and why look at conversion therapy in the past?
I think we're going to do questions.
Yeah.
Quickly from you, because we've got to do questions. Do you think the term modern conversion therapy will land?
Sure, or what about physical conversion therapy? Because to separate it out from the therapy conversion, the physical conversion therapy. I mean, as long as you call it something and we get people to know about it, that's the most important thing.
I'm being told by Kate, my powerful lesbian boss, that...
We just have some questions on Slido.
Yep.
And I thought I might read out the...
Okay, you read them. I don't know if I can actually work this.
The first one, I think, is really important, and this has got the most votes. I keep hearing about puberty being paused by puberty blockers, but this sounds bogus. Could you give us detail? Is it bogus? What happens when you stop? This is a very much a a line that's put out by the people who support medicalisation of children. So what are your thoughts about whether or not puberty is just a nice pause?
I'll give the experts the chance, but I have spoken to the one group of people in the entire planet who have done an animal trial on puberty blockers at Glasgow University. And you probably know this, but they gave puberty blockers to one group of young male sheep, lambs, and they didn't give puberty blockers to the other group, and they compared and contrasted, and they had trained sheep are much cleverer than you would think, and you can train a young sheep to find food at the end of a maze, and that reward is so crucial to a young sheep that it will always remember that, except if it's got puberty blockers, it won't remember where the food is. So there's a form of memory which is affected, and that memory does not return when the puberty blockers stop. The same is true of another difference, which is that they found the young male sheep on the puberty blockers were much more anxious than those who hadn't been given puberty blockers, and that remained static for the rest of their lives. I mean, unfortunately, more research has not been done, but that indicates that it's not reversible. But I'm sure you know lots of other things.
There are windows in puberty, windows for learning. I mean, you know, the fact is we don't know all of these changes. The sheep trials have been stopped. But it's really clear that it's not a pause. One of the questions for me is if you're giving puberty blockers to young boys, the genitalia remains the size of a toddler's. So if that boy then decides he's not a girl after all and stops the puberty blockers, at what age does that lack of growth become irreversible? We don't know, because most of them go on to cross-sex hormones, so we haven't got those studies. But it's just obvious. Puberty is such a critical time of growth for the whole body and the brain, not just secondary sex characteristics. So, of course, if you're blocking the production of those vital sex hormones at puberty, you're going to have some kind of stunted growth in some way. The ways yet that we don't quite understand, but of course it's obvious that you will, because you're stopping what a child needs to grow and develop properly.
And as you've spoken movingly about the impact of puberty blockers on the sort of socializing skills of young people.
But just from a basic level, I mean, if you're a young boy and you're insecure about your sense of maleness, and then you go on puberty blockers while all your friends are sort of developing secondary sexual characteristics and you're not, that sort of reinforces the idea that you're not really a boy. And how do you then think, oh, yes, I am really a boy, despite the fact that I've got a prepubescent body? And you kind of think, well, you need puberty to reassure these people that actually you're, and almost 100% of the people who go on puberty blockers go on to, and also I hate calling them puberty blockers. They're not. They're chemical castration agents. I mean, I hate calling them puberty blockers. It's a sanitized term. And as I always say, we watch films about Alan Turing in the war and say how bad it is castrating the gays in the war, but then we do it to our children. This is exactly the same drugs. So no, they're not puberty blockers, they're chemical castration agents, and of course it's going to affect the psychological development, irrespective of what it does neurobiologically to your brain. The psychological development of a maturing adolescent, of course, if you castrate them chemically, then that's going to have profound effects.
There's a really good book, Inventing Ourselves.
Malcolm.
Boom, boom. There's
Malcolm,
another good book.
Can we ask the...
I'm just going to finish just one point. There's a really good book, Sarah Jane Blakemore. She's the brain expert in Britain, Inventing Ourselves, and she points out that the rewiring of the brain leads to this extreme self-consciousness in adolescence, but it's required evolutionary because it forces kids to bond really powerfully with their peers, because that's necessary. If you're not rewiring your brain because your puberty is blocked, you're not going to go through that period, so you're not going to get the close friendships that you would otherwise have got. Over to you, Kate.
This is the top question in Slido, and it's something that keeps me awake at night. This is a question for Az. Do you really believe there is such a thing as asexual? Or is it a matter of finding a hiding place in a porn-drenched society?
I do think there's something. I see a lot of patients who don't realise they're asexual. And it's much more common in people who are really quite autistic in a way that you consider high-functioning autism, Asperger's, and they're just not attracted to anything, and they find the whole sense of sex icky and disgusting, and they can't understand why anyone wants it, and it's horrible. Why are they interested in that? So absolutely they are. And there's another group of asexual people who, if you have a sexuality, you enjoy doing things that go along with your sexuality, and you have a aversive response to the concept of engaging sexually in things you're not attracted to. Whereas if you don't have an erotic libidinal attraction to something, you may also not get the disgust response from trying to engage in something that you're not attracted to. So they have this sort of mechanically, okay, we can have sex, but there's no erotic interest. And a lot of the time you get people who mechanically have sex because their partner wants to, but they don't really get it. They don't really. So they have a facultative sexual intercourse with no erotic enjoyment, but they have no libido, no erotic anything. Or you get the ones which don't even do that. They actually don't want to do anything. So absolutely asexual exists, and there's a massive correlation with degree of autism and asexuality.
Well, I have one more Slido question. How are we doing for time?
We have 5 minutes.
Oh, right. Well, I wanted to get some questions from the audience. Is there any chance to... Yep. Do you want the mic? Or can you shout? Yes, because no one will hear otherwise. Oh, good. Perfect. Okay.
No, it's
great.
Just the actual condition, what we call transgenderism. It seems to me there are two broad buckets of people. Those who have what's called gender dysphoria, which is in the dictionary a profound unease with your sex. And they know that it's their sex they're uncomfortable with and they want to change it. So there's all these violent measures of chemical castration or cross-sex hormones and surgeries, it applies to them. And then the second bucket, actually people who are not uneasy with their sex, and it came out in the session previously when the guy talked about social media. They're uneasy with the gender stereotype associated with their sex. And it seems that is now the majority of people who are identifying as trans. And it's not, and the idea of putting those people onto sort of sex change therapies is sort of even more criminal than the other.
Stephanie?
So yeah, and the second kind is absolutely being created in schools. So the gender dysphoric child or the trans child is being created now by our education system by teaching children this idea that they're a boy or a girl based on those regressive stereotypes. So it's not surprising at all that it's mostly teenage girls who are changing. I also think there's a connection with autistic children with the bodily discomfort that we can also overlook there. That it is there's a lot of autistic children who are very irritated by their body parts, and particularly at puberty, the developing of the body at puberty. For girls, the development of breasts can be really hard for an autistic girl. So when it's about discomfort with the sexed body, I also think that girls at puberty experience that. It's for different reasons. Doesn't mean they're trans.
Yeah. Any other questions? I mean, we're not necessarily going to respond to them, but it'll give you a chance to. Okay.
I've got the mic. Malcolm, hello.
Oh, Maya, great.
Hi, Maya. I just wanted to give a plug for this is our proposal to ban modern conversion therapy. If you pick up a postcard, QR code on the back. You can read the whole thing. I wanted to put the second part of the proposal to the panel. So the first part is about under 18s, banning puberty blockers, chemical castration, cross-sex hormones for under 18s. But for over 18s, we also think that the government should tackle the mis-selling of what it is that doctors can do for adults. They can give you hormones that can change your secondary sexual characteristics. They can modify your genitals. You know, technically they can do all these things, but they have to be clear that what they cannot do is change anyone's sex, and other people still have rights. And so if you're going to do any of these things to an adult, for them to give fully informed consent, they have to understand what the deal is. And we think doctors have been mis-selling this deal both to children and to adults, and so that's why the proposal tackles both of those.
Brilliant. Going to have to be brief, but do you think that's a workable... two things. Even if you agree with it, do you think it'll work and that legislators will respond to that approach?
I mean, I agree with the point. I agree with the point, is what I was saying about being mis-selling. I don't know how doable it is. I think it'll be a very big struggle to get that one through.
And again, the same with that. I think the sort of regulations are already there. The like service specifications, there's things like that that could come into. But for example, if you look at the guidelines for cosmetic surgery, they're way more detailed than for gender reassignment surgery, even surgeries. The list of things you have to tick off to get informed consent for cosmetic surgery, much more detailed, much more tightly regulated than gender reassignment surgery. So it's again, I think the medical profession, you know, joining up the dots and you know, putting those regulations in place or tightening the regulations so that they're, you know, doing their job properly.
Brilliant. Young gentleman over there.
Hi. I just wanted to ask the panel if they had... I was just hoping to ask if you had any thoughts about the new clinics which are opening and what sort of shape they're going to be taking. Perhaps I'm revealing my ignorance, but I have no idea what those are going to look like. And are your voices going to be heard in the formation of those clinics?
Join the club. I don't think anybody knows what on earth they're doing.
Well, we are stakeholders in that. But yes, Kathleen Stock, I think, is here, wrote a brilliant long read for Unheard about the new clinics. Is she here?
You're going to have to stand and take a bow.
Yay!
So I really urge you to go and find that article on Unheard, because it's really detailed about what's happening. Broadly, Cass is working to bring the service into line with normal standards of paediatric care. The rest of the NHS is undermining her every step of the way.
Okay, I'll just let Az
sum up
finish.
a really brilliant, detailed article which
Brilliant.
you must read.
It's going to be up to a quick one, Az.
I totally agree. I think they're probably trying to do their best to undermine everything that Hilary Cass is trying to suggest. I think they've got some good people going in. I think my concern is that there seems to be a lot of recycling of the old clinic people, and how do you change their views. What I would be interested in is whether they choose to use the outcome measuring tools that I invented 10 years ago with the research team in Australia that I was desperately trying to get the Tavistock to use, and they won't. So it'll be interesting to see whether they do use them.
Brilliant. I think I'm being told to hurry up. One last point, which is, what is it you're trying to get me to do? What?
It's actually to speak to me. Hi there.
Right.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Chris Loader. I'm the Member of Parliament for West Dorset. And it's... thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be with you. The reason I just wanted to contribute briefly is because we've been talking a lot this morning and this afternoon about how we make real influence. And what we're talking about here, we've been talking about conversion therapy in respect of how we influence a potential new government. I want to tell you today that some of us have been wrestling with this right here and now as to whether or not this goes into the King's Speech in 10 days' time. So in case everybody's thinking, oh, we've got 6 or 8 months to think about this, I'm afraid you don't. The message I would like to share with you all today is that the way you influence things is you actually communicate with your elected MP. In my very rural constituency of West Dorset, just to put it into perspective, I have 110 people who've been in touch with me to say they want this bill. In stark contrast, I have 3 people who've been in touch with me to say they don't. This is not the sort of matter that affects constituents in my constituency in the same it does in others. But I want to share with you that it really does put into stark contrast the strength of the lobby that we are up against. And the way in which you communicate, the way in which you exercise your democratic right to communicate with your MP is so important, and I would strongly encourage you to do that, not just about this, but about all the matters we've talked about today.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you so much. That is exactly the sort of interruption that we like when our elected representatives interrupt to tell us something like that. Thank you for being here. That's really, really appreciated.